a lot of mods that come to mind when thinking of the biggest one, but my mind immediately starts thinking about 4 specific mods: Calamity, Thorium, Fargo Soul, and the stars above. All of these mods add all sorts of new gear for each class, brand new mechanics to keep the game feeling fresh, and way too many bosses for me to keep track of. So here's what would happen if you played all of them at once. The first thing I did was change the difficulty. The Calamity and Fargo Soul mods have harder difficulties that add new items and change all sorts of mechanics throughout the game, from getting random debuffs when entering certain biomes to bosses having completely different attack patterns and moves. I turned on Revengeance mode for Calamity and Eternity mode for Fargo Soul. I would have swapped out Revengeance mode for the harder Death mode, but personally, I treasure my sanity. As soon as I activated Eternity mode, an NPC known as the Deviant fell from the sky and gave me all sorts of goodies to start me off. I also had a starter bag from the Calamity mod, so 5 minutes into this playthrough and I was already completely decked out. I then started chopping down trees to clear up spawns so that I would have a place to build my wonderful abode. While I was doing that, I scrolled right over the spatial disc in my hotbar that I had completely forgotten about and wasted no time in choosing Acidity to be my starfarer. Don't get me wrong, I love Aerodani, but I just didn't want to think for this playthrough. I spent almost 2 full days making this house, and I ended up really liking it. I know I only ever use wood and gray bricks to build, but I just love how they look together. Once I was all done, I made myself a wooden whistle and got to exploring. For now, I just wanted to explore a little bit on both sides of my world, and I was grabbing a bit of everything on my way because the Fargo Soul mod adds a shit ton of these enchantments that grant wonderful game-changing buffs. You'll get to see some of them soon enough. Each of the enchantments required a bunch of stuff based on what the enchantment was, so if it was a wood enchantment, I would need to gather a set of that biome's wooden armor and a specific fruit or like an animal, you know, the TD stuff like that. While exploring, I realized a couple of things. For one, a lot of the things were different, like the cacti in the desert actually hurts you now, and the jungle water is straight up poisonous, and for 2, never go out at night. Never go out at night. It's actually ridiculous. After learning these things, I decided to spend the rest of the night in a cave looking for ores and life crystals, but I was mostly met with slimes that were high out of their goddamn minds, dude. Just look at them bounce around. They're bouncing like crazy. All jokes aside, I found quite a bit of ore and even a few life crystals. I used the cacti that I gathered while I was in the desert to make almost full cactus armor, and I used some of the ore to make myself a harmonica, and it was much better than that wooden whistle I'd been using. Okay, pause. I'm future Oklah, and I'm here to quickly explain the bard class since I ended up using it quite a lot. The bard class is from the Thorium mod, and if you couldn't already tell, you use instruments to fight. Each instrument has an empowerment that is just meant to buff the player. In the beginning of the game, it'll just be like an extra 10% movement speed, but towards the end, some of the instruments can give you up to 16 extra defense or like 20% extra damage. This class is ranged, but it deals symphonic damage, which means that it doesn't use ammo and instead uses a new thing called inspiration that works like mana but recharges much faster. And I think that's the bard class. Resume. I then kidnap the traveling merchant so that I can smush them into whatever I want later on. After that, I began gathering up some grub to go fishing, and you may be wondering, Oklah, why are you fishing when you can just buy whatever you want from the NPCs? And it's because it's enchantment time, baby! I'm making the cactus enchantment, and all I need for it is a flounder, so once I had enough grub, I headed over to the desert and got to fishing. Oh, and I'm also making the wood enchantment, but I already have everything for that one. As soon as I caught the fish, I returned home and made some more NPC housing, because with all the mods I'm using, there's going to be a lot of them. I then got started on my elevator because I wanted to get gold or tungsten armor before turning my current cactus armor into an enchantment. Mining is so hard with all these difficulties added. Like, there were even some hard mode enemies spawning, but I will say, I did kind of pull some crazy ass moves on these guys. I was down there for a long ass time, and honestly, I didn't have much to show for it since I was too busy stunting on these guys. Holy shit, I am so good at this game. During this time, I kidnapped another traveling merchant. Once I returned home, I dumped everything into my magic storage and used the gold that I had found to make a bugle horn that released a sick-ass twin pulse of sound. After a bit more mining, I gathered up enough tungsten to make full tungsten armor and then immediately began looking for a crimson biome. You can only make enchantments at a crimson altar, and I obviously went the wrong way after walking almost all the way across the left side of the map before finding one. I made both the cactus enchantment and the wood enchantment. The wood enchantment makes all NPC shops cheaper based on how much the bestiary is completed and works as long as it's in my inventory, and the cactus enchantment grants me the ability to release a spray of needles when attacking and causes all enemies to explode into needles on death. There were still a couple of enchantments that I wanted to make, namely the lead and iron enchantments. These ones were much easier to make because all I needed was a shit ton of lead, which I already had, and a couple of fruits, which I also already had. I went to the right this time to find a crimson biome, and it was much closer than the other one, and it was also right next to a snow biome, so I gathered up everything I needed to make the boreal wood enchantment as well. I then used the altar to convert a bunch of the lead into iron, made what I needed to make, and got myself the lead, iron, and boreal wood enchantments. The lead enchantment makes me take 40% less damage over time and causes my attacks to inflict a new lead poisoning debuff that can spread to nearby enemies. The iron enchantment grants each material I craft with a 33% chance to not be consumed and also works in my inventory. And the boreal wood enchantment periodically throws snowballs while I attack. I ended up equipping the lead and boreal wood enchantments and put the other two and the cactus one into my vanity slots. I put the cactus one there because with it in the vanity slot, at least I won't take damage from the cacti. At this point, I figured it was about time to start taking out some bosses, so I took out the first boss for the Fargo Soul mod, the Trojan Squirrel, and the first mod for the Thorium mod, the Grand Thunderbird. The only thing of use I got was this grapple from the Grand Thunderbird that kind of allows me to fly, but for just a split second. These first two bosses were unbelievably easy, so I figured that the King Slime would also be easy, but I was so absolutely wrong. The King Slime, one of, if not the easiest boss in Terraria, was kicking my ass in a way that I had never experienced ever while playing. I struggled with this guy for a while and decided that I just need some wings, man. Like, my mobility is ass right now, but unfortunately I didn't have a gravitational potion, so I'd have to make one. Before that though, I went to the desert, got some desert fossils, carefully processed the fossils, and used the sturdy fossils that I got to make myself a sitar. It's like a guitar, but with an S. I had everything I needed for the potion other than a fire blossom, so I completely finished the elevator, and while looking for the flower, I just got the potion from breaking pots. There goes all my hard work, but it's whatever, I have the potion. I used the graph potion to find a sky island, but I wasn't looking for fledgling wings. No. All I needed were feathers and some cloud, because the Calamity mod adds a recipe for making the wings. Once I got all the feathers, I returned home, made the wings, and got back to fighting the King Slime, and I managed to beat him on the next try. He dropped a bunch of stuff, but I didn't end up using any of it other than the slimy saddle that I use every single time I play this game. I then made 16 more rooms for the new NPCs because my little hotel was already at max capacity. Once I was done with that, I headed back to the desert to get some Stormline mandibles and a Stormjaw staff completely by accident so that I could make a desert medallion and fight the first Calamity boss, the Desert Scourge, and this guy was much easier than the King Slime. I got nothing of use for this boss either, but the fight took me a good couple of minutes, so I thought that maybe I need a new weapon. I decided to make the Skyward Loot, and while it didn't turn out better damage-wise, its empowerment gave me an extra 8 defense, so I kept it around. Afterwards, I remembered that there are these things called inspiration fragments that would increase my max inspiration just like how mana crystals work, so I went mining for a bunch of thorium ore and caught a shit ton of stars. I then headed over to the nearest Crimson Altar and made as many as I could and ended up doubling my inspiration. There weren't any other enchantments or anything I wanted to make just yet, so I moved on to the next boss, the Giant Clam. This one is more of a side boss, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to take it out. So I headed over to the desert for like the third time now and dug a hole all the way down to the sunken sea. The Giant Clam ended up being extremely easy and I didn't get anything of use from it, so I just headed back home, but as soon as I did, the Eye of Cthulhu spawned, and this was no ordinary Eye of Cthulhu. It was dashing everywhere, launching these weird scythes, and don't even get me started on the second phase because dead ass, what the hell is this? I pretty obviously lost to the crack-fueled Eye of Cthulhu, but it happens to be the next boss, so I guess I don't really get a choice. My sitar wasn't going to cut it, so I did some research and found a weapon made of stingers and spores that had some hope, so I gathered up enough of each and made a pan flute. It dealt a bit more damage than my sitar, was rapid fire, and it only used up 1 inspiration per use. It kind of seemed like a goated weapon. I chose to replace my sitar with the pan flute, my Stormjaw staff with the Wolfram controller, and got to work on the Eye of Cthulhu, but as you saw earlier, this guy was no joke. It took me a little over an hour to beat this guy, and I just barely won. Thank you, holy shit, oh my god. I don't even care that I died right after, holy shit. Just like all the other bosses, it dropped nothing of use other than the typical Shield of Cthulhu and Cryptane ore. Okay, wait, actually, it did drop a Death Stare rod that summons an eye above my head to shoot at enemies, and I did use that. To prepare for the next few bosses, I wanted to get out of this tungsten armor, so I made some Victide armor using the drops from the Desert Scourge, and it gave me less defense, less damage, but it increased my life regen by 1.5, so I kept it. I made the summoner version of the armor, and it got me to realize that most of the armors from these mods don't have a bard version for obvious reasons, so I thought I would try switching over to summon, but the next boss showed me how stupid of an idea this was. In the end, I switched back to being a bard and still chose to wear the Victide armor. I had never even seen this cursed coffin boss before, and this guy was actually pretty difficult, mainly due to the small arena, but the blocks are impossible to mine, so I wouldn't be able to like increase the size of it anyways. It took me a couple of tries, but eventually I was able to beat it, and it gave me nothing of use, just like pretty much every other boss I've fought so far. This boss helped me realize that I needed an arsenal upgrade, but not my weapons or armor, no. I needed to get some better accessories. I made a mouthpiece. It makes all the projectiles of wind instruments homing, and I swapped that in place of the pad of paper. Now that was actually the only change I made before defeating Crabulon, but after that I decorated my house with all the relics I've been getting. But then after that I defeated the Vagrant of Space and Time. But I swear on Relogic himself that after I was done, I attempted the Brain of Cthulhu and lost miserably. I kind of deserved that for getting so far off track. Okay, so I got a teensy bit sidetracked and ended up doing all of that and defeating the goblin army, but it's okay because finally, after all of that, I removed the boreal wood enchantment, since it was pretty much useless at this point, and started stacking potions for their infinite buffs. I got endurance, I got regeneration, I even got creativity, which just increases the chance of enemies dropping those little music notes on death. Oh, and I also equipped the Yew wood armor because it increases my attack speed. Afterwards, I felt pretty prepared and it was finally time to take on the Reign of Cthulhu, but I literally could not beat this boss. The issue was that the boss's AI was being overwritten by both the Calamity mod and Fargo Soul mod, so the boss was just doing moves from both of the mods at the same time, and it was making it literally impossible. I tried to beat this thing for a long ass time, but I just couldn't, and since this was only the third vanilla Terraria boss and things would get a lot more difficult from here, I decided to turn off Eternity mode. The difficulty is cool and all, but I was spending like an hour per vanilla boss, and with all of the other bosses added from the other mods I still had to get through, this playthrough was going to take me well over 100 hours to record, and I just wasn't having fun with it anymore. So I'm sorry, but Revengeance mode will be the only added difficulty going forward. Once it was turned off, I was able to defeat the Reign of Cthulhu. Oh my god, okay, I totally forgot to mention that I made a Yew wood loot, and it worked very nicely against bigger groups of enemies, but I kept it around for its regeneration enhancement that it gave me. I used the Cryptane ore and tissue samples to make Jester armor, and yes, it increased my stats by a little bit, but it mainly just made me look like an idiot. I then made a Deathbringer pickaxe and headed on over to the Thorium mod's Aquatic Depths biome. This place was beautiful and filled to the brim with enemies, but I was only here for the Oklah. Once I had enough of it, I returned home and made two new bard weapons, a marine wineglass and a scuba curva. The wineglass was hard to use and there was a slight delay between throwing it and exploding it, so I didn't use it, but the scuba curva seemed pretty good. I summoned a blood moon to better test it out and it was pretty good. Until the very end when I used my pan flute and it worked out much better. I then used all of the blood that I got to make the infinite buff for the blood potion, which just increases my mining and movement speed by 15%. Afterwards, I went back to the aquatic depths to get a bunch of marine kelps so that I can make the infinite buff for the frenzy potion and the aqua potion. The frenzy potion increases all attack speeds by 8%, and the aqua potion grants me uninhibited movement in water. With all these new buffs, I was feeling pretty ready to take on some more bosses, so I defeated Thespian, the active alchemy, who has over 14,000 health by the way. I took out Viscount, the Queen Jellyfish, the Perforators, and finally ended with the Skeletron. But guess what? I got nothing of use from any of those bosses. I then went into the dungeon and got a shit ton of bones so that I could come home and make the bone trumpet, and not only did it deal a bunch more damage, but its empowerment also increases attack speed. Afterwards, I finished the elevator, got a bunch of hellstone, and then used the hellstone to make Noble's armor and a hot horn, which turned out to be worse than my bone trumpet. Since I wasn't using a wind instrument anymore, I replaced the mouthpiece with a subwoofer that gives me 2 additional armor piercing. I was feeling pretty good about my gear, so I headed on over to a granite cave, made an arena, and took out the granite energy storm. Right as I got home, I also summoned and defeated Dioscoroi, the Twin Forces. The next boss was the buried champion from the Thorium mod, but I had to find a marble cave to fight him, so I began looking around, but actually completely forgot about this boss since I had ran into the Goblin Tinkerer. I bought a Tinkerer's Workshop and rocket boots like I usually do, and then headed home to start combining some shit. I ended up making lightning boots and the Devil's Subwoofer, which just adds fire damage to the regular subwoofer, and then started attempting Slime God, but I was having some issues with this guy because it splits into so many different parts. Eventually I defeated it, but I got nothing of use from it. Surprise, surprise. After fighting all of those bosses, I decided to take a little break and made some more NPC housing, but it wasn't long before I went out there and defeated the Star Scouter, but honestly, it was no easy fight. I was really struggling with these last few bosses. Like, I thought things would be super easy because I would get to combine all the gear from all of these other mods, but things weren't going my way. And then it came time to fight the Wall of Flesh. I made a Hell Highway about as long as I usually do, but since the wall had double the usual health, I was unable to beat it before it reached the end of the path. To combat this, I literally doubled the size of the Hell Highway, and I was running into the same issue. Like, I would get the wall down to like 50% of its health almost right away, but then some second phase thing would kick in and I would start dealing like significantly less damage. I attempted the wall a few more times to see if this was just some sort of one-time fluke, but it happened every single time. Eventually, I came to the conclusion that I just wasn't dealing enough damage as the Bard class, so unfortunately, it was time for a change. I fully switched over to the Summoner class, since it's the best class in this entire game, and this involved new armor, new accessories, new weapons, and most importantly, new minions. I chose to use the Arsenal Staff from the Thorium mod and the Herring Staff from the Calamity mod. The Arsenal Staff summons a sword and shield that can only be summoned once, but can take up to 4 minion slots to increase its power by up to 4 times, and the Herring Staff just summons a cute little school of fish. Oh, and I also kept the Bard weapons around just for their buffs. Using all of the new gear I made, I summoned the Wall of Flesh for the final time, and I didn't even use half of the Hell Highway. Not even a half of it, bro. The Bard class is so ass. I should have known to just go Summoner. I always go summoner. I'm so good with summoner. I just need to stick with what I know. Anyways, I fought the wall a couple more times, once with my new ice clasper minions that I got in the snow biome, and used the treasure bags to get a summoner emblem and the firecracker. And then farmed a shit ton of goblin warlocks until one of them dropped an accessory called the first shadow flame that increases my minions by 1 and causes them to inflict shadow flame. I was gonna get myself some spider armor as well, but I had no clue where a spider cave was, so I just gave up on that. I didn't want to look for one. I was now ready to take on some more bosses, and since I was in hard mode now, I figured I was about halfway through the bosses, but then I took a look at my boss checklist, and I could not have been more wrong. I still had so much left to go, and at this point the video was going to be like 3 hours long, so I did what anyone would do and became a speedrunner. Holy shit. Give me a second. Oh my, give me a second. Oh my god. That was a lot. Just keep playing the video. Just move on. Just move on. Holy shit, that was a lot. I mean, I defeated what, like 22 different bosses? That was ridiculous. But we aren't done. There are still 19 bosses left for me to defeat. 29 if I include the side bosses, so I wasted no time in making myself some new gear now that I had Luminite. Before that though, let me recap on the gear that I continued to use during all of this. Firstly, I've got a star tainted generator that gives me 2 more minions, 7% increased summon damage, and my minion attacks now spawn astral explosions and inflict several different debuffs. Secondly, I've got an Aquatic skull that increases my summon damage by 10% and gives me another minion and gives me another sentry. Thirdly, I've got a hallowed rune that inflicts me with 1 of 3 debuffs whenever my minions hit an enemy. I end up getting either 8 defense, 10% more summon damage, or an extra 1.5 health a second. And finally, I've got the Status's Curse, and it gives me 3 more minions, 12% increased summon damage, increased minion knockback, and my minions inflict the Shadow Flame debuff. Oh, and I've also been upgrading my boots, and so far I have a pair of Angel Treads. From the Moonlord, I got a Celestial Onion that gave me an extra accessory slot, but I kind of forgot about this and instead farmed the Plaguebringer Goliath for a fuel cell bundle so that I could turn it into a tactical plague engine that summons a plagued jet and fires bullets from my inventory and occasionally fires a missile instead of a bullet. I tested these bad boys out on the Moonlord because I needed more Luminite, and they did not disappoint. Afterwards, I figured out exactly what I wanted to fill my extra accessory slot with. I wanted to start combining all of the enchantments from the Fargo Soul mod, so I made a Crucible of the Cosmos, which is just every crafting station smushed into one, and got to work. Now, I knew this was going to take me a long ass time, because for all of these enchantments, you need to use pretty much every item in the game, but since I'd been keeping literally everything I've picked up ever since I started the game, it went by much faster than I expected. After about an hour of gathering up the most random assortment of bullshit in this game, I had finally made every enchantment required for the Force of Terra. These accessories do a lot of different shit, so I'm just gonna let you guys pause right here and read this. I was working on the Force of Earth next, but while doing this, the sky suddenly filled with light, which meant that night would never fall, so I quickly went out and defeated the Warrior of Light. And by quickly, I mean it still took me like 5 minutes to do, but that was much faster than the 15 minutes it took me last time. With the world back to normal, I got right back to making enchantments, and after like 3 hours of continuous grinding and farming, I was able to make not just the Force of Earth, but the Force of Timber and the Force of Nature as well. Oh, and for some reason during all of the farming, my Plague Jet minions just stopped working. I'm still not sure as to why, like even now, but I had to switch over to these pretty little butterfly guys instead. Now, you may think that achieving the status of a god was enough for me, but you would be very, very wrong, because there's still 5 more forces for me to get my grubby little god hands on. But first, to make things easier, I made the Flowers of Mortality, and it just summons 5 beautiful flowers to circle me. Afterwards, I got right back to grinding and farming, and let me tell you, this shit is boring. Dude, like, all of this, it just feels like I'm doing chores for my mother back in elementary school. It was so boring. It was so boring that somewhere along the line I decided to take a break, make an elemental axe summon, make full Stardust armor, and start exploring the galaxy. At this point in the game, there wasn't much for me to find or do in said galaxy other than take out this crazy ass space boss known as the Arbitration and take out the final boss of the Stars Above mod, Tsukiyomi, the First Starfarer.
I can see there is no more point to holding back. Know that I have given you ample time for surrender.
Yeah, that boss fight was kinda lackluster, but I'm God, what can you do? I then went to go take out Ashram Deus because I had completely forgotten about him and my PC could barely handle this guy. It's now time to take out all of these champions, and what I thought would be a breeze turned out to actually be difficult, but I prevailed nonetheless. The champions were dropping an absurd amount of money, like platinum coins at a time, and they were just dropping the enchantments themselves that I had spent so long grinding to make. It made me feel like all of my time I spent making these forces and these enchantments and shit a waste. Out of all of the champions, I, for some reason, just couldn't beat the Champion of Death. There was too much to dodge, and it was literally impossible to escape from taking damage. I thought that maybe the champion of all the champions, Eridanus, would be easier, but I was so unbelievably wrong. Even with almost every single force, I just wasn't able to beat either of them. I ended up skipping these bosses for now so that I could gather up some of the better loot from the other mods with the intention of coming back later to show them who the real champion is. I went on to defeat the Profane Guardians, Providence the Profane Goddess, and Dragonfall before reaching the final boss of the Thorium mod, the Primordials.
Be careful!
This fight was even more lackluster than the final boss for the Stars Above mod, and it's so funny to me that this fight only lasted like a single minute because the last time I fought this boss a couple of years ago, it took me like 12. I used all the Infernal Essence I had gotten to make full Infernal Armor, an Ember Staff that summoned a new minion, and the Primordial Staff that summoned the Infernal Primordial as a sentry. I tried to defeat the Champion of Death and Eridanus again with my new gear, but I still couldn't beat them. To cope with this weakness, I went out and defeated all 3 Rune of Cost bosses and used the new materials I got from them to make the King of Constellations Tenryu. It's a summoned weapon that summons 2 sick-ass dragons, much like the Stardust Dragon Staff. I also made the Promethean Staff to fill up the rest of my minion slots. I used these new summons to defeat Poltergast and then immediately made more summons. I made the Warlocks Moonfist and Sirius, and after testing them on the Champion of Timber, I chose to continue using the 2 dragons, the Moonfist, and the Promethean mirror-looking things. With this setup and some impressive skills on my behalf, I was finally able to beat Eridanus, Champion of Cosmos. He dropped the enchantments for the Force of Cosmos, so as difficult as he was to beat, I chose to farm his ass and make the Force of Cosmos. Later that night, I tried to defeat the Champion of Death, but I just still couldn't. I don't know why, I just still couldn't. I was trying to think of what I could do to improve myself without just taking on more bosses, and then I remembered about the Stellar Array from the Stars Above mod. I spent some time reading through each ability and chose to use Iron Will, Healthy Confidence, and Spatial Stratagem. After I was done, I summoned probably the hardest boss thus far, Abomination, and he got me the first time, I will give him that, but I defeated him the second time around. He dropped Abominable Energy that can be used to combine every force together to make the soul of Terraria, but first I would have to defeat the Champion of Death. It took a bit of time, but eventually I was not only able to beat this boss, but I was also able to farm it for all of the enchantments needed to make the Force of Death. I then used the Abominable Energy to combine all 9 forces into the soul of Terraria. Now unfortunately, this item doesn't keep the effects of every single enchantment, but it does give me the best out of them all and frees up 4 accessory slots, and I wasted no time filling those up. I equipped a Phantom Artifact, Profaned Soul Artifact, Charm of Myths, and a Blood Pact, and to sum all of them up, they basically just increased every single summoner stat there is and gave me more health. With my newfound power, I went through and defeated the Old Duke, the Devourer of Gods, and fought through the Pumpkin Moon, Frost Moon, and Solar Eclipse to get all the Nightmare Fuel, Endothermic Energy, and Dark Sun Fragments I would ever need. During this time, I made the Mirror of Calandra so that I could summon 5 different ancient weapons to protect me. After all of that crazy chaos, I smushed together all of the new materials I got to make a bunch of Ascendant Spirit Essence. I then used this new essence along with the Cosmolite Bar that I got from the Devourer of Gods to combine my Charm of Myths and Blood Pact into the Chalice of the Blood God and my Startate Generator and Status's Curse into the Nucleogenesis. I also made a Dark Sun Ring, full Fearmonger armor, and the Cosmic Viper engine. In the end, I retired my sick-ass dragons and continued to use the Mirror of Calandra, Cosmic Viper engine, and the Staff of the Mechworm that I got from the Devourer of Gods. Once I felt all ready to go, I defeated Yaron with ease, might I add, and replaced my Cosmic Viper engine with Yaron's Kindle Staff. I then mined a bunch of Auric ore, combined it with the Yaron Soul Fragments that I obviously got from Yaron, and made Auric Bars. I then used the Auric Bars to make the Radiance, which just gives me a bunch of different health boosts, and made full Auric Tesla armor. Okay, I know I'm kind of throwing a lot at you guys, but at this point there were only 3 bosses left, and I wanted to be as prepared as humanly possible for them, and there was only one accessory left for me to make, the Conjurous Soul. This accessory would give me the boost in summons, damage, and confidence to finish this playthrough, so I spent about an hour gathering up pretty much every single summon weapon Terraria has to offer, and smushed all of them together. I was going to go a step up and make the soul of the universe, but that would have taken me hours longer and honestly just wouldn't have been worth it. Up first were the Exomechs, but I had totally forgotten that you have to make this super convoluted ass machine to even summon them, so I got started on that. After a bit, I got to a point where I just needed more power cells to charge the machine, so in the meantime, I figured it wouldn't be a bad idea to test out the fight with the mutant, and honestly, things could have gone better. To summon the mutant, you have to make a voodoo doll of the Abomination and throw it into lava, effectively killing him, and this causes the mutant to go fucking apeshit on you. Like, I'm talking full baboon on crack crazy, dude. I was obviously having no luck in beating this guy, and I knew that my only chance was with endgame Calamity gear, so I sat my ass in front of the machine and waited for more batteries to charge. After about 2 hours of waiting, I chose to just fight the Supreme Witch Calamitas, and I was way overprepared for this fight. As easy as it was, the fight was still cool as hell, and I know that technically this wasn't the last boss fight in the Calamity mod, but I thought it was cooler to make the ending of that mod centered around that than this. Yeah, I waited like 4 hours for that, but anyways, the Calamity, Thorium, and Stars Above mods are all complete. The only mod left was Fargo's Soul mod, so I prepared for my final boss fight. I got Ares' exoskeleton by defeating the Ares mech last in the Exo-Mechs fight, and I made the Endogenesis. The exoskeleton summons 4 of these sick-ass arms around me, and I get to choose what kind of weapon I want on each arm. It was pretty sick as fuck. The Endogenesis summons an Ascendant Ice construct that does all sorts of stuff. And with that, I was as ready as I could be for the final boss of this playthrough. It still took me a few tries, and I had to memorize most of the moves, but in the end, I bested the Mutant. After my victorious battle, I talked to the Mutant, and he said he wants to go at it for real next time, and I think he's referring to his Eternity mode form. Nope.